It's been a while since we've been at this discussion. Hard to believe that our last restriction notice was January 19th, 2024, a whole 7 months ago. And while many content creators, including myself, have been thinking about what Bandai may hit, the wait is finally over. The narrative of today's video is to briefly go over the restrictions, which ones were good, and which ones were questionable. But to add to that, while players may have seen videos already in regards to what the restrictions are, I want to move past the what into paving a path to the future. Many players have already begun playtesting for the upcoming Bandai Digimon regional event in Texas, and now it's time to really get your creativity on. While these lists may be good for the health of the game, remember, our fellow tamers in Japan are ultimately the guinea pigs of formats, and tend to have to deal with the struggles of a Hackmon and more. But enough talk, let's look at the restrictions more in depth. The first card to no surprise on everyone's bingo card was Ukkomon. Doesn't matter if it was the promo or the BT16 version, it was one or the other and it had to go. Obviously the only problem with this card is that while general, it again overtuned the basics of several decks. And while Numon and Ancient Garurumon decks were the upcoming meta contenders to abuse this card, the question is, what now? Numon decks may have slowed, but here's the thing. Even with black-based Sunomon or even purple-based with Demi-Miramon, the question is, what do you want to account for moving forward? By removing the standard lineup of Ukkomons, you now have 3 open slots to add to the level 3s, and with black or purple base, it's honestly really easy, considering both could utilize the starter deck Agumon and Gabumon that gain you a memory if your opponent has a Digimon in play. You could also reinforce the Floodgate line with either memory blockers or the dreaded play cost reducer Floodgates to counter Death Xmon. Bottom line with Ukkomon, it was nice to have generic support, but again, Bandai is slowly learning to improve the card game. Some players I spoke with felt that Ukkomon should not have had a generic Digivolution cost, or should not even had a Digivolution cost altogether, or not even trigger itself when it was promoted out. Case in point with BT17 and the Eosmon cards. Previously, you saw Eosmon had Digivolution costs from green or white, but now, it's all special Digivolution costs that lock them to each other. And even some of the early reveals of BT19 indicate that we won't have Digivolution costs for Digicross Digimon. So when you get on Bandai's case that they're making mistakes, nothing's ever perfect from the get-go. Lui Ohwada was in a similar situation with promo Ukkomon as well, in that it was a pseudo-hybrid for game if you either pushed up a level 3 from the raise, or abused the memory system with certain tamers. Do I agree that Lui was the right hit? Seeing the pseudo-loop with Gabumon and Ancient Garurumon was mildly amusing, but to that end, amusement can only go so far. In my personal ranking system of promo 123 Ukkomon, promo 130 Lui Ohwada, and BT1682 Ukkomon, I honestly felt that the Ukkomons were the primary offenders, with Lui being a second. That being said, returning to your typical list of Numon, losing Lui means that you now have more room for Satsuki Tamahime as that tamer that can mind link with Numemon, and Munzemon Digimon for other benefits. But for other decks like Ancient Garurumon and more, it's time to cook. As for Numemon X, you truly had to pick your poison here between this card and Munzemon X. To some degree, I kind of actually like Munzemon X, and at the same time, leaving this card unrestricted was likely a tactical move on Bandai's part to assist in promoting the puppet archetype for Sendromon decks as another avenue for deck building. For Numemon X, free floating into a level 6 and then Ruin mode, disgusting. At this point, it's just adding more Numemons into the level 4s from BT14, to work in conjunction with those Satsuki Tamahime plays, especially if you're close to maxing her out as a tamer. The next restriction was probably the funniest one to me, because I did suggest it on my restriction prediction video. When I was looking over the list in Japan during their current format, I saw Hammer Spark being used a lot, Ancient Garurumon, MirageGaogamon, and something was just different. And because it was being utilized so much in blue decks, it felt like the same instance of Savior Hackmon. Yes, I know I bring up this specific Digimon a lot in regards to restrictions, but when you look at the exact phrasing for why this card was restricted, it was ultimately a, "This card has been in the format longer than expected, and we don't want players leaning on it too much for use." It definitely helped with choking your opponent, and who doesn't like running into not 1, not 2, but 3 insecurity? Needless to say, it's healthier that this card is gone in the long run, but there are several cards I'm still wanting axed out of the game completely. For substitutions at this point, if you're not running memory boosts, you could use this instead to gain the memory. Training options are also viable, while the third and final option won't be available until December. The next 3 restriction cards are obviously some of the bigger ones to discuss. Awakening of the Golden Knight is a really strong option card. Though as a player who leans more blue base for Magnamon, it's pretty apparent why you wouldn't run it either. Though in more recent times, I did see more lists running Awakening of the Golden Knight at minimum 2 copies, or even 4. The thing is, if your level 4 lineup is anything but Magnamon, you should probably run it. And with the newest, shiny promo Flamedramon, you bet players were going back to running it even in blue base Magnamon. Now with only 1 copy of the card, what do? In all honesty, you could still run the 1-of and just run all Magnamons in your level 4 lineup. The saving grace of this card is that it prevents DP reduction and also cheats the Digivolution cost from 5 to 3. But for Yellow Vaccine variants, there's a lot of work here. Yellow Vaccine-based Magnamon X look to primarily utilize BT14 Patamon in order to cheat into an Armored Vaccine Digimon like Rapidmon or Gold Vidramon in order to then utilize the option card Awakening of the Golden Knight to go straight into Magnamon X. Ideally with Patamon and BT14 TK Takashi, you could promote out Patamon from the Rays, and having used BT14 TK the previous turn to set up the security, evo into one of those vaccine armors for free. Memory gain off TK and Patamon meant that you can now effectively go into Magnamon X for 3, assuming you had the option card and choke your opponent to 1. Instant turn 2 immune Digimon that's really big? Perfect. But the problem with the yellow base variant now is that the restriction not only hits Awakening of the Golden Knight, it also hits that really important TK that sets up your security. With 6 new slots to fill, what's the play? While I've done a comparison of what you can substitute in or out, this one I'll be leaving a little suspense, as I've already crafted a deck that may be promising for Yellow Vaccine players moving forward. In discussions with one of my locals, Emissary of Hope was a 1-2 copy card, but now with Awakening of the Golden Knight gone, this card will likely move up to 3 or even 4. In regards to your tamers, nothing will ever replace BT14 TK Takashi, but the most you can do now is evo in the back with Patamon, and then slam down BT1 TK Takashi to check the security. While you can't put anything in there, you can gain insight on what your Patamon will go into the following turn. Also, your opponent would need 2 Digimon Emperors now to counter you. And for the final card that was on this restriction, well, actually this is more of an unrestriction, was Starter Deck 6 Gabumon. This old card was previously placed on the restriction list, and honestly I was a little surprised to see this Digimon come off. The main reasoning for this is because the when attacking effect is not once per turn, meaning Purple Garurumon almost has a full line once again to utilize, save the X-Antibody variants. Because you could combine this with Garurumon and Garurumon X, at least at the time of release, this made the Apocalymon engine very consistent. Not to mention, this made Garurustar a powerhouse of a deck. Is the deck viable? This one again is another deck that I'm currently looking into. But with the release of Blast Digivolution, Bandai feels that this card can come off the list because of so many interactions that can happen during battle. While there were quite a few restrictions for this one, I think a lot of players are asking a few questions in regards to, why not Imperialdramon? Why not MirageGaogamon? Why aren't other cards unrestricted? Frankly, Imperialdramon has not been seeing consistent tops like the other decks we've seen with Numon, Yellow Vaccine, and Magnamon X. Players may find 1 of 4 cards with Imperialdramon as unbalanced. Number 1, Return to the Primogenitor, which effectively is an HPD for Imperialdramon decks and further protects it from deletion. Whether it's by battle or effect, your immunity extends past Partition. I could realistically see this card being hit in the future, but not at this time. Number 2, some players functionally feel Pyldramon is busted, but the thing is, so are only the cards that build up to it. This one's the lowest card on my radar to touch, not only because it's a super rare, but the fact is, there are other cards that build up to this that are much more powerful. Number 3, which leads to BT12X Vmon and Stingmon. While neither of these was crazy, the fact that Imperialdramon is the only line that has end of turn DNA level 3 inheritables that can also search for pieces and their tamers really helps for consistency. But to top it all off, these can also gain you back memory when you DNA. So if you push out with one and play the other, end of turn DNA can be 2 memory, or at times with your Davis and Ken plays, free. And number 4. On the topic of Davis and Ken, this is the one other card that while powerful, I don't see getting limited. you return to a much slower crawl train of DNA if this card were at 1. Bottom line, it just feels too soon for Imperialdramon to get any substantial hits. But for the last topic of this video, it's going to be focused on MirageGaogamon. Whether you love or hate Mirage, you can't deny that the deck has been around for a long time. There are multiple arguments in which you could say the deck should be laid to rest permanently, while others feel that the deck is balanced. Though to be fair, one of the earliest defenders that got a restriction for this deck was Ukkomon from BT14. And while MetaGarurumon capitalized on this level 2 as well, is the fault to go to Ukkomon for being too generic, or is the blame to be placed somewhere else? MirageGaogamon's representation in the Grand Asia Open event demonstrated that it didn't even need 4 copies of Thomas Norstein to be a threat, so limiting either of those tamers felt very pointless. Ultimately, when I looked at a lot of MirageGaogamon cards, the only card that really made sense to limit was BT11 MirageGaogamon. That being said, this card is generic and splashable in a lot of blue decks, so the question, why wasn't MirageGaogamon touched? My theory right now is that because Numon was the primary target to be hit, Numon won't be as represented as it previously was in events. Remember, typically in an event you'd see anywhere from 15 to 20, if not slightly more percent of the competition be Numon decks. But now all of that changes as the format evolves once again. Numon not only had consistency, but because of its ability to build wide and float into other bodies, it made security control honestly not that viable. But now with Numon being slowed down and potentially being played less, maybe security control returns to the meta. And with security control, this means that MirageGaogamon can't get away scot-free anymore potentially, with what it could run into. A simple option could remove it from the board before completely combos off. While there are other decks and cards out there in the Digimon card game that players may want to understand or know more of, what are your thoughts on today's expanded discussions on not just the cards that were restricted, but the potential of other cards making it into the fold, or what you can substitute these cards with? Let me know your thoughts because next week, it's crafting a lot of decks as the format begins anew. This is DIGI-PANDA, logging out.